went out to like all faculty. It was, everyone was in class and it was like the lion, like an animal is loose. Stay in your rooms. And we were like, which animal? We didn't know. It was a monkey. And then like 20 minutes later, the monkey's back. I'm like, "Phew, okay, good.
They just.
Wait, what? I'm sorry. Not all of it, just bits of it. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Nothing like those random messages about free animals.
Did they specify what the animal was
No,
initially?
no.
That's terrifying.
It was terrifying. We were all like, was it the lion? You know, no, the monkey. Just one.
I mean, I'm sure it's really cute. I've never been, I've been here for so long and never been to the zoo.
It's
No.
kind of sad
Why?
because it's so small. It's a little sad
It's a little
because it's a teaching zoo. And so like they have very small like spaces.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's something, I find it a little sad.
Like stores in the mall, they have puppies there waiting to be sold and they stay
Oh,
there.
they're
It's like, I
so
don't like
fast.
animals and cages.
I have apology class and I walked like the perimeter of the zoo.
Oh, you do? Where's the zoo then? There have been some weird up there.
Right over there.
I've actually been to the zoo. Can we get the reactions to the friends?
No,
What? This is the-
yeah. So go on
I
to Saturday.
do
Do I have what I want?
I think so.
Or just give me a number.
Or if you have your number, sometimes that's fine. It depends on the person working the front.
Okay, fair enough.
Usually
Flip
they're
a little
pretty.
10, then you're gonna go.
Right.
Fair enough.
How is everybody? It's
I'm
May.
waiting. I'm waiting
Right?
for it to be over. I'm
It
waiting for
is,
to be over.
okay, so at this point, there's no denying what we have left, right? Like, so if you look at the syllabus, today's the fifth, right? So happy Cinco de Mayo. But today is the fifth. And then we have Monday, Wednesday, and Monday. Okay, so 3 days, including today, and then our final, which we don't meet. So that's it. I don't know about you, but I get sentimental at the end and I get sad, right? Like, I'm gonna miss all of you. So I'm gonna keep that like shelved for like at least one more class. Not today, well, we don't have to be sad yet. But as we get into next week, I'll be sad a little, like I'll miss you all. I get used to staring at all of you for all these weeks, right? But so we have today, what we'll do is we'll talk about the worksheet from the movie that we spent 2 classes watching, and then I'll collect it. And I'll kind of highlight a few things from the chapter as we go through the worksheet. And then we'll talk about chapter 15, which is kind of a brief chapter. It's all about disorders of aging, but we'll get into that. And then our last 2 classes will be on forensic psych, which is, I think, kind of a fun way to end with some criminals. What a good way to go out, right? And then our final will be on Wednesday next week, the 14th. So our last official class is a week from today. So today, Wednesday, Monday. Oh, and then on the 14th, you have your final online. So sad but exciting. We're almost there. Yeah.
Is our final gonna be graded before the essay or final diagnosis? Is that gonna be done and graded before the final exam?
Yeah. Okay. I'll be grading them throughout the week. So I'll have it done before you take the final.
So you know. For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And I wrote this up here, don't forget, I'm gonna remind you, that final paper is due by tonight. If you miss the deadline, you can still turn it in late. It's 10% off each day, but obviously better to get some points than no points. So if you miss this, you can still email it to me tomorrow or the following day. I wrote this up here, this is a reminder, we talked about it last time. You are responsible for a little bit of APA formatting, just a little bit. What I wanna see is that you have a title page and a references page. And on your references page, you should have your show and an academic source. Okay, so that's all that I'm looking for APA formatting, but it is worth 10 points. So the first thing I'm gonna do when I open your paper is make sure that you have a title page and a references page with those 2 things. That's the first thing I'm gonna check. Just full transparency, that's the first thing I grade. So if you look on Canvas, there's 4 or 5 sample papers. And if you just follow their formatting for the references page or the title page, I think that's the easiest way. There's also some great handouts from the Writing Center that show you how to do all of these things. But that's all I'm looking for. And then obviously, like I said last time, if you quote something, cite it. I'm not caring if the citation is correct, right? That's not something that's covered in this class, but at least give credit to something if you quote it directly. Okay, so are there any like last questions about the paper? I look forward to reading them. I know papers aren't ever fun to write, but hopefully it was kind of interesting with the character that you picked, yeah. Yes, it can always be over. I will never take off points for being over, but it shouldn't be under. So it's 5 to 6 pages without those two. Okay, so make sure that you have a solid like 5 to 6 pages that you wrote about your character. If it's over, that's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's totally fine. So I'm not an English teacher, right? My partner's an English teacher, so I leave that to her. But so I'm not gonna be like really strict on that kind of stuff. My main interest, couldn't talk there, is your analysis of the character, right? So as long as your writing doesn't like take away from that, you're fine. And yeah, you can totally kind of conclude with your own thoughts, completely fine. Anybody else? Anything else? Yeah. Sure.
Like if there are two, then it's.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people, what they'll do is take like a paragraph at the end, and might be kind of what you're asking. Take a paragraph at the end to make some comments about other thoughts, right? And that's totally fine. I'm just looking to see that you can kind of do what we did with Arnie, right? But in a little more depth with your character. Okay, anybody else? Yeah.
Class party.
A class party. I wish we could do a party, right?
Allowed.
I know, right? I wish that we could. That would be fun. I wish we had time.
I
It'd be so
know.
nice, right? In my personality theories class, I always ended it with a big, like, everyone brought a food to represent their personality.
Oh.
And I loved that class, probably for that reason, but you know, I loved that class for that. Yeah. Right, we don't meet. So we have today, we have Monday, Wednesday, and then Monday. Right, so those are our 3, and then on Wednesday, the 14th, sorry, Wednesday, 5/14 is the final. And that's on Canvas. Yeah. That's that, and technically, we're on Monday, I mean, so we can kind of erase it, but not really, we have the whole day, right, but it's almost like Monday's gone, right, if you want it to be, if not, write it back, but that's okay. Anything else about that? One last reminder then, remember there was that 20-point extra credit. Okay, so if you're feeling at all like, oh, I know I missed a couple of participations, or maybe an exam score wasn't what you wanted, that 20-point self-care extra credit is still there. You can do it all the way until the final. Okay, so you still have 2 weeks or like a week and a half, I guess. If you want to do that, it's worth 20 points. It just goes on to your grade. Okay, so that's on Canvas. You can find it under modules, but it's still there if you would like that opportunity. All right, so let's spend some time talking about Arnie, right? We watched a movie for 2 classes. Let's go ahead and kind of look at him a little bit. What I want to do, let's get a list of stuff from number 2 going, and I'll try and kind of shorten the items that you give me so we can get like a good list. But what are some of the things that we have that you noticed in the film? Give me one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he does a lot of that.
Yeah, often it's almost like in an uncommunicative way too. Like sometimes when when your children also have this,
Yeah.
they are using it as a way to communicate, but for him, it just seems kind of pointless when he does it.
Mhm.
So it's also-
Yeah, I love that. He does a lot of the echolalia, the repeating, right? Repeating, very common. Did you have one too? What do we got?
I'm gonna say that just like he has childlike behaviors
Yeah.
where he doesn't learn from mistakes. Like he'll do the same action again and again with no sense of danger.
Okay, so we got childlike behaviors and let's say no sense of danger. A little bit of overlap between the two, but also different. Yeah. Yeah, he does have some things he's fixated on, right? Okay, yeah, what do you got?
He doesn't seem to understand the life and death.
Mm-hmm.
He accidentally killed a grasshopper, and like it was obvious. What he did definitely killed a grasshopper, and then he was surprised when it happened.
Yeah, right. He like was purposefully doing it and then cried and upset about it, right?
Yeah.
Not quite understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they were talking about his dad. The way he reacted.
Yeah.
He didn't understand.
Hmm. Yeah, great. What else do we got? There's definitely more. What else could we add to here? Yeah.
Unusual motor expression.
Yeah, he's got some motor stuff. Motor movements and expressions, yeah. Yeah. Or. Person. What else? Yeah.
Just
You come over.
trouble focusing and maybe with memory too, like people will tell him to do something and. He won't do it, or they'll tell him to stay somewhere, and as soon as they walk away, he'll wander off,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not on purpose.
Yeah, it's just like struggling to remember and focus on that. Great. You had your hand up too as well. What do you got? Yeah. Can't take care of himself, yeah. Mm. Okay, what else? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Anything else we want to add? Yeah.
He doesn't understand others' emotions, let alone his own emotions.
Okay. Understanding. Of emotions. Should have written poor before that. Poor understanding of emotions. Anything else we want to add? I mean, that's a great list, but yeah. Yeah. Or. Okay. Anything else? Trying to think if there's anything else that I would add. He does a lot of counting. That's one thing I have written down. I don't know if any of you wrote that down at all. Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good list. Anything else? Just to make sure. Anything? Okay. So how about if you flip over for number 3? Don't worry about explanations quite yet, but what are some of the diagnoses that you came up with for him? Yeah. Okay, so ASD, so autistic spectrum disorder. Anyone have anything else, even if it's not the full picture? Anything else? There's a couple more we could add. Yeah, oppositional defiant. Okay. Anything else? Anyone have IDD? Hopefully, maybe IDD. See how many letters we can get up here, right? So we have ASD, ODD, IDD, maybe some ADHD. Let's go here, right? Like, let's just add every little like acronym we can put. Anyone have anything else? Okay, so let's spend a few minutes in like talking about this. So are we, most of us, thinking that he's on the spectrum? Okay, so let's go there for a minute. So oppositional defiant disorder, ODD, and conduct disorder are precursors to antisocial personality disorder, which we talked about before. You have to have these in order to be diagnosed with that. Now, I think we see some elements, maybe a little bit of that in Arnie, but it doesn't quite manifest 100%. Like it's not purposeful necessarily. I think it's kind of better captured by other things, even if there are a few elements here. And I also think he shows a few elements of like ADHD, some of that impulsivity and the hyperactivity and the lack of attention and the lack of like focus and memory could be a little bit similar to ADHD. But again, I don't think that's the full picture. He definitely has something much more like global and pervasive. So a lot of you went here. So what are your thoughts? Why are we thinking that Arnie might be on the spectrum? What are some reasons why? Yeah.
This is significant difference between social interactions. He also has like repetitive patterns of behavior, like avoiding things or phrases. And I thought that his combination also required very substantial support. So
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, there are different ways of supporting.
Yeah.
I think he.
On the spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that lower and higher functioning isn't always beneficial to point out, but in this case, I think it would be beneficial to point out that he's lower functioning and he's not simple.
Okay. And so it used to be just called autism, right? And then we have autistic spectrum disorder. It is like everything else, a spectrum, but we especially refer to that here because it can be such a range from really mild to really profound and severe. Other thoughts as to why maybe autism? Yeah. Okay. Other thoughts? Anything else in support here? Yeah.
Lack of understanding of something that is wrong and right, like he doesn't understand that when talking about death, when someone is in a funeral, you're excited about something, he doesn't understand that he's offending somebody else.
Sure.
Because he doesn't understand his environment, that's coming from like, as a child, you have to analyze your environment, so maybe as a child, you didn't do that or something.
Okay. You're screaming about the burger barn during the
Yeah.
funeral, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it's not just that, like, there's other things too, where like, they'll see something on the TV, and he'll just repeat it to himself.
Yeah.
So it's like repetitive behavior, super intense interest, like almost like an over obsession.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I have, my partner has a student who I think I mentioned him before. He's obsessed with Sonic and Sonic the Hedgehog, right? And again, nothing wrong with that. My kids are obsessed with Sonic as well. I'm like, I have my shadow bracelet because of my kids, right? But we watched a TikTok video over the weekend and I wanted to save it because we had talked about this before, like, where do you draw that line? And like his entire room, everything from floor to wall, like ceiling is Sonic, everything, right? There's literally no room. Like we have some of his Sonic stuff in our house, like because he had to give it to his teacher because he got in trouble with his parents. Like, and so I literally have a box of this kid's Sonic stuff in my garage. My kids are like, can we have it? No. But like we have so much of it and it's spilling over. So there's like an obsessive fixation on something. And he does a little bit of things that are kind of related to this. The counting, the perseverating, or the obsessing are very, very common. The repeating things is also really common. There are some, and the motor movements, right? Some of his kind of stemming, like in motor movements that he does. But there are some things that are not at all typical of autism. Anyone have any ideas on that? Like Arnie doesn't quite fit this neatly. Any thoughts there? Or?
Maybe he's very attached to his brother, like
Yeah.
touching wise, because sometimes
Yeah,
you'll see autistic people can't be touched because to them, they
right.
don't have process, they freak out, like you can't touch them because to them, it's like harassment, because they don't know how to process it.
Yeah.
It's like a kid, if a kid is being touched with someone they don't know, they freak out.
Yeah.
He's not an adult who understands the police are putting in handcuffs because he's done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an example of how he's okay with things, hugging and giving affection to his brother, when some autistic children don't even
Right.
talk or don't even touch anybody but themselves.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the biggest ones. So the fact he's very affectionate, very warm, he hugs, he touches, those are things that you often do not see in someone who is on the spectrum. Not impossible, but it's very uncommon for people on the spectrum, especially like severely, to be okay with physical contact and touch. Yeah. Yeah. And that's this. Yeah,
Exactly, I don't know
yeah.
if it's- But I don't know if, like, I think that the things with regard to that. Like, because I don't think it's that they're like, they don't want people to touch them, I think that it's just like a lot of times process overstimulated.
Yeah, that can be part of it too.
They can process it,
Mhm.
or it makes them uncomfortable, and we can't see.
Yeah, right. Okay, so a couple of pieces there. We'll go here and then I'm back up.
No, I like, I've changed the, scheduling,
Right.
kind of like when, like, he would always have his bath and then he doesn't have it anymore and he's not at all bothered by it, or when, Gilbert's literally like, I'm gonna torch the house, he's like, yeah, this is completely fine, like, I'm not bothered at all.
Yeah.
Like, they're doing different things like on different days and like everything is like really unbalanced and it doesn't really bother him at all.
Yeah, and that's really uncommon to see in someone who's on the spectrum, that changes in routine, changes in behavior are okay. There's typically a like, that's the rigid behavior in some ways. It has to be like, follow the like prescribed schedule, otherwise it leads to a lot of upset.
Often I think that there are a lot of negative symptoms as well, as in when we were talking about schizophrenia.
Yeah.
That's where, I think that like up there it says lack of responsiveness.
Mhm.
I think he's very over responsive.
Very.
He's very emotionally expressive, which, you know, that can be positive, some people with autism, but
Yeah.
for the most part, I've noticed that there's often like a lack of sort of excitability or.
Yeah.
Or things like that.
Like a flat affect,
Yeah.
almost. Yeah, and that lack of responsiveness is another big, like, reason why I'm not sure I'd put my money here. Like, he has elements of it, but oftentimes people who are on the spectrum, and again, it's a spectrum, so it's all over the place. But they often struggle with social interaction. There's often like a lack of responsivity to other people, can be very muted or flat affect, not a lot of speech. There's a lot of language and communication problems. And again, people can be highly functioning with this, but what we often see is there's a really poor like social cue stuff, and we have a little bit of that, but it doesn't tend to present that way always with autism. Yeah.
He's okay with you changing everything.
Yeah.
Have that for developments that the family was without, and everything. Because they don't establish a routine, they didn't seem to make an effort to establish a routine.
Right.
And so I think that that's kind of where that comes into play, the IDD, because he was never given a routine to establish.
Yeah.
And so that's probably where that, could have stemmed from. So he was never able to develop all of those routines and all of those
Yeah.
things he was quote unquote meant to, or that he could have developed.
Yeah, and I think when we get to contributors and causes, I don't think his family has helped things, right? Yeah, and I think that that could be a big area for like improvement. I want to mention one side note really quickly. How many of you have heard of Asperger's before? Right? Okay, so a lot of you. So Asperger's used to be its own distinct disorder, all right, before the DSM-5. It was its own unique version, kind of like an offshoot of autistic spectrum disorder, but with a slightly different presentation. Oftentimes people with Asperger's are incredibly smart, very, very smart, like high level of intelligence, but then struggle with a lot of like social cues, social interactions and things. Now that obviously doesn't fit Arnie, but it has been absorbed into autistic spectrum disorder at this point. It is no longer its own unique disorder. It is part of being on the spectrum, right? So my partner's student, I would technically say would have fit Asperger's. Very bright guy, no social cues, like none. Like he's getting broken up with like every week and a half, right? Because this guy just has no like awareness of other people, but really, really intelligent. So just as a side note, that disorder is now part of the spectrum. It's no longer its own unique, distinct disorder. Did you have a thought with that up in the? Yeah, it's not, right? And like with every DSM, right, we make some changes, and that was one in the DSM-5 that it was absorbed into the spectrum. So we've kind of been talking about this a little bit. So not to put too much out there, but if I had to make it, yes, I would go here. Right, this is where I would put it, and that's for one reason. Arnie does not act his age, right? He acts like a 3 or 4-year-old a lot of the time. And that tends to be how you would describe this. Somebody who's not acting their age, they're not at the right level of intelligence and developmental like skill for their age. So Arnie like couldn't take care of himself. And somebody said that, right? He can't care for himself. He's got like some poor understanding of life and death. Those are things that you would see in a very young child, not someone who's about to turn 18 and so on, right? So my children, when they were 4, could bathe themselves. Not great, but they could do it. Right? He couldn't do that at like 17, almost 18, right? So the fact that he acts very, very childlike, he has like poor social cues, childlike behaviors, no sense of danger, poor understanding of life and death. Like a lot of these things to me scream here. Now, I don't think he fits neatly in either of these, which is why I think he's such a great character for discussion. And a lot of the characters that you're diagnosing in your papers don't fit neatly either. So it's kind of a game of like, where do they fit best? And then describing the areas where it doesn't quite fit. So again, I would say if it were me, I'd put Arnie at like a moderate, maybe level of IDD, intellectual developmental disorder. Used to be called mental retardation, but they changed the name, thankfully, in the DSM-5. But he has a low IQ. He doesn't act his age. And a lot of areas for improvement, which we'll get to in a moment. But I do think you could also make a strong case for autistic spectrum disorder. Neither of them are perfect. Either one kind of captures. He definitely has like a global issue with his like functioning. Yeah.
Arnie and a lot of the characters in our paper don't fit neatly because they're fictional. and
Yeah.
Conditions are fictional, is that like how, just how people are, they're like,
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Oftentimes we don't fit neatly. Like our culture wants us to fit neatly into everything, right? Whether it's gender or orientation or mental illness or whatever it is, we want to fit in that box. A lot of people don't fit in the box, right? Especially with mental illness, like, and that's why we have that NOS, that not otherwise specified, because oftentimes people don't quite meet all the criteria. Like, I was thinking eating disorders, for example, maybe you have someone who is clearly anorexic, but they don't fit the weight criteria, or they're clearly anorexic, but they sometimes purge, right? Then where do you diagnose them? So we have that a lot, and I think the media loves to combine disorders too to make things more dramatic. So it's kind of both, in my opinion. It's a little bit of both. Yeah. No, right, I mean, and that's where they come from. A lot of people fit them very easily, right? But then there are a lot of people who like have a few things that don't quite fit, or maybe you could easily diagnose them with a different, and you have to pick the one that best fits them. Anybody else, any other thoughts here for the moment? Comments, thoughts? Yeah, sorry. Let's hear it. Maybe, and I mean, and right now, like we talked about before, autistic spectrum disorder is like a really big buzz thing right now. It's very like in our cultural awareness at the moment. And obviously this movie is quite old, right? But I do think right now, like people would tend to see that first because it's relevant right now. And that tends to play a role too. Mhm. So what if we look at number 4? What do you think are some contributing factors? Maybe it's not the whole picture, but what's contributing here? Yeah.
So I went to probably didn't stop smoking when she was.
Yeah.
Like Arnie was in utero or any of the kids were in utero. So
Mhm.
I think that's probably definitely a factor.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of foster care
Mhm.
of people with parents with substance use problems, having children that are like
Yeah.
newly diagnosed with either like autism spectrum or IDD.
Yeah, and
Or,
so,
like fetal alcohol syndrome or ODD and all
right.
that.
So using cigarettes or like smoking or drinking during pregnancy tends to have a high correlation with this because you're depriving oxygen, which affects development. Yeah. Yeah.
And she was like not always listening.
Hard to say.
Yeah, I think it's also like the family was not well equipped to handle the needs.
Yeah.
The system, like as a society, like no one was telling them like he needs a system, like
Right.
whatever, like to do every day, like he needs assistance. Like his family could have really like used some like maybe a government assistance, like a person to come in and help him, because it also is affecting everyone else in the family and their ability to care for themselves and him.
Yeah.
So it's both parties.
Yeah, right. Like a behavioral aid, and there's at least, what was it? You, like, there's at least one person that you're like an applied behavioral aid, right? Like somebody in here was, I can't remember who it was. Like, are you okay? I'm like, there's 2 of you. I remember like you had talked to me about it. But like somebody who comes in and like works on concrete skills with Arnie, oh my gosh, that would go a long way, right? Like, and supporting for the family, teaching them some better ways of adjusting. Yeah. Yeah.
Like also the area of nothing, so just like
Yeah.
nothing, so.
Yeah, that's a brutally small town, right? I mean, at least they have an ice cream place. Could be worse, right? I could live there in theory if they didn't have the ice cream place. No, thank you, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I think that you'd probably still have a learning disability, but he might be better able to take care of himself and protect the people better if that didn't happen.
Sure.
I also think that their financial situation would really lend for.
Yeah.
Support, even getting help from the government, that might incur some costs.
Mhm. A lot of environmental stuff, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That situation in that whole scene, when he's obviously very like shaken up about it, she says to him no more baths,
Mm-hmm.
which is like.
Yeah, that's not gonna work, right? Yeah. Yeah, very enabling, right? Like that's not gonna help him to learn to take care of himself in any way. Yeah,
The town doesn't look at the family as highly respected, they very
No.
much look down upon them for
Sure.
having a mother who is severely obese, having a dad who was suicidal and killed himself, having a family that doesn't have a lot of money, even though it's a very poor town, you see some families have more than others.
yeah,
And they're on the low end of it, where they don't have much, and the only way they have food is because Gilbert has a job. that
right.
Provides all that, so I think knowing that nobody cares for you
Mhm.
is really hard, especially because Arnie, though he is, possibly with theorists of IDD. He's gonna feel that, and he's gonna feel like what's happening, like
Mhm.
nobody wants us here.
Mhm.
He's gonna
Again,
eventually feel that.
that environment, right? All of that environmental influence. Yeah.
Which
Sure.
to a certain extent, it makes sense, but sometimes like some days Gilbert will be incredibly patient and it's like
Mhm.
very like helps like sit them calm down, and other times like he'll say one thing and they're like, that's it, like they're
Yeah.
all freaking out, screaming at him, like probably makes it not any clearer what is or what isn't acceptable.
Yeah, very inconsistent and such a hard scene to watch when Gilbert loses it and smacks him, right? And I appreciate that they put that in there because to care for somebody who is, struggling, whether it's ASD or IDD, right? It's taxing, right? And you see him just kind of pushed and pushed and pushed, and he's just a teenager himself, right? Like, so he's really like taking on a lot of responsibility, but hard to watch, but I think relevant to that strain that people can feel in having to care for someone. Yeah.
Question is, do we know how old Gilbert is? Because if then we can figure out like,
Yeah.
whether possibly smoke during Gilbert's pregnancy, like,
Yeah.
because then you see the other family members, they seem pretty like,
Mm-hmm.
their IQ seems normal for their age, but then you have Arnie,
Yeah.
so that maybe takes time, like.
Yeah, I'm not
families
sure.
involved. That's also questions.
What was that?
Yes.
Yeah, right. So Arnie's not the youngest, right?
Right.
So it's like the sister and then Arnie and then Gilbert and then the older sister,
Yeah.
right? So, and it doesn't have to be that every time, like
Yeah.
somebody genetically is prone that way. I often wonder, and like I'm totally speculating here, but Arnie loves to climb that tree. I always wonder if maybe as a kid he fell, right? And had like a head injury. I mean, that's just my I'm totally speculating here, right? But it could be that it was a prenatal thing. It could be environmental. It could be genetic. It could be that he had like a head trauma. It could be the trauma of his dad killing himself, right? We don't really know. But that's what I want you to be doing, right? Like be thinking about like what are some potential contributors, and maybe it's not one of them, maybe it's all of them, right? We don't really know. We have to speculate sometimes. We're not sure. How about what are some things we could do to help him? Kind of like building off of what you have already said. What can we help him with? Yeah. Yeah.
In a situation like this,
Mm-hmm.
like, I guess practicing like calming down, de-escalating without like, because there's a lot of escalation within that house. that's
Yeah.
actually very overstimulating. in that
Mhm.
way, Where.
They
that would
scream a lot. It's very
Yeah,
overwhelming at
where
times.
I could, like, yeah, definitely like adjunct family therapy, awareness.
Yeah.
Families uneducated,
Mhm.
all that.
I think all that might be really helpful. Yeah.
Assuming that healthcare was free. I
Yeah,
think it's
right.
okay with
Yeah.
appropriate for his age. I think that also Gilbert was like kind of onto something when the bath scene where he wanted him to be mad, and he was like.
It was a good
kind of
idea.
teaching him. But I think that could have done with more supervision. Could have been really beneficial. And so, smaller manageable steps would
Mhm.
definitely help. So just also like maybe a more stable living environment, like
Yeah.
maybe an outpatient program if that would be in the picture,
Mhm.
some.
All of those things, right? And yeah, he had a good idea, just more supervision, right? Like, so, okay, I'm gonna leave you for a minute and I want you to do this one thing, right? Like, I want you to wash your feet and I'll be back in 1 minute, right? And then you check, like building up to it and repeating that over and over rather than like, okay, you can wash yourself, I'm out, right? But those kind of skills are important to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely want to touch on occupational therapy or like a behavior intervention, but I think one of the like really for this family,
Mhm.
like, and just support for them, like reinforcements of like, it's clear that they're like all out of patience, because like, for the most part, I think Gilbert was doing the best he could.
Yeah.
Like, with the tools that he had,
Mhm.
he just had like a little bit of a reinforcement. His family, like the rest of his family, like that. I'm kind of good at supporting.
Right, it kind of all fell on him, right? That's a lot to put on one person, especially someone who doesn't have any training or education in what to do. Anything else we want to add? Yeah.
I feel like he could really be taught, like, since his speech is not the best, and he doesn't communicate very well. He can be taught like maybe hand signs or maybe just a few ASL signs
Sure.
to express emotions, like, 'cause especially with his hands, he's very fidgety with his hands.
Very expressive with them
Yeah,
too,
so he could probably do like a fist when he's angry, and as opposed to, you know, like attaching to somebody, and then Gilbert's gonna lose his mind because he's being loud in a big environment. Like, to avoid the emotional stress,
Mhm.
he can use his hands to signal an emotion or if he's uncomfortable, as opposed to the whole environment being uncomfortable,
Yeah.
not just for Arnie, but for the family and everybody else.
Mhm.
It's that plays a role in the town not liking their family because
Yeah.
they don't have experience with a child who needs a lot of support.
Mhm.
It's the only one in town.
Yeah, yeah, I think that could help too. But yeah,
I think also maybe more, socialization. Like
Yeah.
Either just in general or with similarly disabled people, I don't know if that's possible in the town.
might have to go outside the town a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but their house is so isolated from
Yeah.
the whole rest of the town, like they completely live on their own.
Mhm.
And I would guess he probably didn't go to public school,
Yeah,
and so his only, and he does like, when he's at work with Gilbert, he does talk to other people, but I feel like if he had more opportunities, especially growing up, to socialize
Yeah.
with like other people that aren't his family who baby him and let him like they don't necessarily correct him when he says something rude. I think that might have helped him adjust a little bit more.
yeah, right now it's for somebody to bring up school, right? It's clearly summer, right? So they're not in school, but I think maybe maybe even outside of his town for some kind of school, like there's no support. And I think it's a theme a lot of you are bringing up of like needing something beyond the family. I think to really counter for that environment, a lot of environmental influences. So we got to change the environment. And that's obviously not going to get rid of either of these things. But people with ASD and IDD can very much learn specific concrete skills that change everything for them, right? And so kind of teaching some of those things, like I think Arnie can make a lot of progress if he had good support. Yeah.
There's, like,
Yeah, I don't see any school. Right.
There's no reason to think about public school, and I feel like if you'd gone to school, you'd probably more like socially developed. And
Sure.
stuff. So that would be more obvious, like it's kind of clear that it's coming, when they have a socialization for his family, but
Yeah, and I think adding something like some kind of like structured school environment, whether it's like something more like a special ed or maybe just even mainstream school, like just some kind of like concrete environment.
I would also think that he did go to school at one time, but he was so
Sure.
so difficult that like they were constantly being called and.
Yeah, maybe just pulled him, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, more than anything, because can you imagine getting the call after day and they're trying to survive and do the best that they can, so
Mhm.
then what do we do? So, because you cannot tell me that town has the services that they really need. There's
Yeah.
no way.
I don't think so either,
No
right?
way.
It doesn't.
You would, I mean, that type of service would have to come from outside of
Yeah.
the area, and that happening is, I mean, even nowadays, it's slim to none, unless you're really, unless you're the squeaky wheel, right?
Right.
And
You'd have to
that's
really-
just being honest about it,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't get the impression that his mom or any of them are gonna go out there and be that squeaky wheel for
They're
him.
definitely not happening.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that, his like cooped upness could also be, causing some of his impulsivity.
Sure.
Because he has like no.
It could be bored. Yeah. Right, and that's just, and you see that with kids, you don't give them enough stimulation, they'll find it for themselves, right? And he definitely does, Is that a hand? anything else about Arnie? Anything else about the film? Like any other comments? Yeah.
I was wondering, what you think about, because I don't think it's really a part of any of these diagnoses, why the doctors told him he would die so young.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So there is a correlation between people who have like IDD, especially like if I go back here. So with intellectual developmental disorder, there's kind of 4 levels or of it, if you will, from mild to profound. And typically when people have severe or profound IDD, it shortens their lifespan. And it's often just because of the poor choices that are made, in terms of like not understanding the consequences of their actions. So it's not that those necessarily shorten your life, but there is a correlation between, it's that whole correlation does not equal causation. Or again, go back to that, maybe he had an injury, like, and that might have been something where they had like a flag for why he might not live longer. Because that's one thing that isn't really captured by any of these, right? You see it a little bit here, there's that correlation, but not necessarily with being on the spectrum. It doesn't necessarily correlate with a shortened lifespan unless it's severe, in which case it just tends to be a matter of like care and choices can put someone in danger.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they said you would die at like 10, right?
yeah, or like that he wasn't supposed to live that long. They're
Yeah.
pretty vague about it, right? So it could be that he had an injury, it could be something we don't know, or it could just be that, you know, because of his choices, maybe it shortens his life expectancy. Yeah, it's kind of the one big unknown thing. I'm glad you asked, because it's a mystery to me too, a little bit. But there is, like I said, a correlation here with that one. Anything else about the character? So again, I feel like this is wonderful practice for your paper, and I know a lot of you are either done or very close to done, or I hope that's the case at this point since tonight. But if you aren't quite done, this is exactly what I want you to do, right? You're looking at what are the signs and symptoms your character is showing. What does that fit, right? What diagnosis can we then make? Using these things as examples to support the criteria. What are some causes and contributors? What are some treatments? And then what are some closing thoughts? It's like the exact format you're going to follow for your paper. All right, if you want to make sure your first and last name's on there, I'll take those from you and we'll continue on here. Do I have everyone? Okay, all right. So let's move to chapter 15. Where are we at here? 15. So we go from disorders of childhood to disorders of aging. My grandma lived to 102, which was crazy. That's so old, right? I don't want to live that long in life, right? She looked 102. No, 102 is brutal, right? I read yesterday, there was this interesting article that came out that our maximum life capacity is 125, right? That is the oldest a human being could in theory live, right? 125. But my grandma at 102 used to say she was well seasoned, right? And so this is my nod to her, right? With like the seasons and thinking of like, we often use the metaphor of like fall and like changing colors and like autumn for getting older. But yeah, she was well seasoned at the end. I would agree with that. 102, that's up there. But these are disorders of being older, right? So just like disorders of childhood, now we have disorders of aging. There's a bunch of different examples. There's kind of like one big category of disorders that we'll talk about here. And with geropsychology, that's the field that we're in here, we're looking at the study of the mental health of elderly people. And elderly in our culture is defined as being over 65. So 65 and older would put you in the group of elderly. And just like every other age range, whether it's childhood or adolescence or adulthood or whatnot, we have special pressures and unique upsets and biological changes that come with getting older. And that's kind of what we'll look at here. And in general, what we can do is kind of divide up the disorders for this group into 2 categories. There are disorders that we've been talking about all semester that can also affect people that are older, right? So when you're older, you can have anxiety, you can have depression, you can have schizophrenia, you can have all the disorders that we've talked about all semester. The ones that we're more interested in are the disorders of cognition that tend to come when we get older. Things like Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's and things that we'll talk about more in a moment. So kind of two main groups. And the first group are the things, again, we've talked about all semester, right? Depression, anxiety, substance issues, right? Psychotic disorders, personality disorders. If somebody had depression as a young adult, very likely it persists into late adulthood or anxiety, whatever it might be. One kind of interesting side note there, and I gave you a hint over here, substance abuse in the elderly tends to take a different form than it does in younger people. The most commonly abused group of substances for elderly groups are prescription medications, right? And this can come in a couple of different ways. It can be, I know better than the doctor, so I take what I think I need, right? Which is my mother-in-law to her core, right? She's like, oh, the doctor told me take one, so I take four. Right? I'm like, but he told you one. Yeah, but one's not enough. I'm taking four. Okay, right. Oh my gosh, we had our soccer game on Saturday and my daughter Kaya had a headache. And my mother-in-law was like, oh, I have some Advil. And she opens this bag of just like completely unmarked, like jumble of pills. And was like, here, let me find one for you. I was like, hold on, Kaya, I'll get you an Advil. I don't know what those are or where they came from, right? But like just kind of that idea of like, I make my own cocktail. I know better. That's one way it can manifest. Another way it can manifest is forgetting that you took the medication and taking it again, right? And again. And that sometimes happens as well, which is why these little pill boxes are so common among older individuals, so that you remember whether you took them or not. If there's no pills in there, you took it, and that's your cue, right? So oftentimes it can be like a purposeful, I know better, or it could be like forgetting that you took it. You also see people often going from doctor to doctor to doctor to get medications and kind of hoarding them a little bit. That's another way that this can manifest. So just kind of one little slight variation that you tend to see a lot of abuse of prescription medications in people who are older. Now, what we're much more interested in the kind of bulk of this chapter is on the disorders of cognition. And these are tough ones, right? How many of you have known someone who's had something like Alzheimer's or Lewy body or Parkinson's or something to that effect? Right? A lot of you, they're brutal, right? They're very challenging disorders for that person and the people in their life. And that's where this kind of, those fall into the second one down here. But as we age, we tend to get more and more small mishaps in memory. Like, where did I put my keys? I forgot that person's name. Where was I going, right? And these things happen at any age, right? When we're distracted, when we're tired and so on. But our memory does start to decline as we get older, especially if you don't take good care of yourself, which we'll talk more about later. Now, people can sometimes have far more extensive memory loss than is normal, and that is typically what we would call a neurocognitive disorder, which used to be called dementia, commonly referred to as dementia, but the technical name is a neurocognitive disorder. Now, I have something else up here, so let me kind of compare these. Delirium. And then we have dementia, or neurocognitive disorder. So there's a really uneven line there, right? It's going to bother me, but I'm going to leave it. So with delirium is a very, very short lasting condition, right? It has an incredibly fast onset. And it's typically reversible if you can figure out what caused it. So delirium is something that anyone can experience at any age. And it's typically brought on by a fever, an infection, right? So my father-in-law went into the hospital last year with pneumonia, and he developed a delirium, right? His fever went so high, he didn't know where he was. He was confused, he was agitated. When they brought the fever down, the delirium went away. Right, that can also happen with infections. It's very common in hospitals, like after surgeries or procedures. It's a very short lasting like confusion. You don't know where you are. You can't focus. You can't concentrate. You can't think clearly, but it's reversible if you treat the infection or fever or whatever it is that caused it. Dementia or neurocognitive disorders have an incredibly slow onset, and they're typically not reversible. They progressively get worse and worse until they claim your life, oftentimes. Okay, so what we see is that the slow onset is like years, right? Things like Alzheimer's take years to develop. It's a long, slow, gradual decline. And then typically we can slow it down or treat it, but we can't reverse it, at least not yet, right? Lots of research being done, but nothing quite yet. This one is much quicker and able to be reversed. So just kind of one distinction. And there are a lot of examples of dementias or neurocognitive disorders. The most common one, and the one that a lot of you have probably heard of or seen, is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease, named after Alois Alzheimer, who was the first case way back in like 1906 or something along those lines, is a very common form of dementia. And it typically doesn't happen until after the age of 65. If it happens before 65, it's thought to be a little bit genetic, but after 65, it's just a disorder of aging, right? Your chances of developing this, the older you get, go up, right? It's just a very common product of aging, sadly. So what happens with this is it's an incredibly slow onset that lasts like 8 to 10 years, 8 to 10 years from when it starts to when it ultimately claims your life. And what you see is that people just slowly decline. It goes from like small mishaps to forgetting your name, to forgetting your children, to forgetting your spouse. It just like it progressively gets worse and worse. And eventually your body forgets like how to function, and it does claim your life. It's the result of a couple of things. Little things called neurofibrillary tangles and senile plaques. It's these beta amyloid proteins that clump up in the brain, and they interfere with the way that neurons communicate with each other, right? It's something that we all have, but people who have Alzheimer's have them in an excessive amount. And a lot of our treatments are aiming at like breaking up these tangles and plaques to try and either delay or slow down the progression of this disorder. Right? So it's got a lot of like biological components to it. It is thought to have a little bit of a genetic predisposition, but only if it happens early, like before the age of 55. Before 55, we call that early onset, and it's somewhat genetic. 65 and older, it's just a product of aging. There's also a lot of culprits with like dopamine and acetylcholine, a lot of like neurotransmitters that we target with medications. But these two things, the tangles and plaques, are really the big culprits. Yeah.
So if you have family who develop
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, 65,
It's not genetic. Nope. Right. So you can rest easier on that maybe a little bit, right? So if they got it 65 or later, there's no genetic component to that. Only if it occurred like in their 50s or earlier. The earliest documented case was a 14-year-old, right? Exceedingly rare, one person. Okay, and that had to be like some like really wild like mutation of something that happened. But it's typically like sometimes you see it in someone's 50s or 40s, but even that is pretty uncommon. And it's typically after the age of 65. And again, the older you get, the more at risk you are. So by the time you hit your like 90s, right, you have a very high chance of developing it.
do you think that would hold true if the person who developed it had like a severe like learning disability or?
Not necessarily, right? I mean, there doesn't tend to be, it's these plaques and tangles, and we don't quite understand why they build up more in some people than others, but it is a huge focus of research. So many different trials and drugs that are trying to be developed to really slow these two things down or break them up, dissipate them in some way. Yeah. Your body literally forgets how to function, right? So what happens is it's almost, it forgets how to breathe, forgets how to fight off an infection. It's like your body has reached a point where your brain is so like jumbled with these things that the messages it's sending no longer are effective. And so people just slowly kind of shut down. Their body just kind of shuts down on them. And a disease, a cold, like could be the end, right, for you. Right. So that's kind of what is the ultimate like end for people is their body can't fight something off that they probably could have fought off if they didn't have this going. Yeah.
So does a lot of people say it to always do like aerobic exercises because you won't have airflow in the brain. So if you sit for like most of your life, if you don't exercise for the first 50, 60 years, you're more likely to have lack of airflow in your brain.
I mean, that's one of many components, right? Diet, and we'll get there, like, but diet and exercise are big ones. Interestingly, there's a lot of research now to indicate that high blood pressure has a negative correlation with this. And then also we see that glucose levels, like they're almost like proposed a type 3 diabetes that might make somebody more vulnerable to this, right? It's not official, but it is something that's gained a lot of like traction with diet, blood sugar levels, blood pressure. Lifestyle choices play a big role in delaying this, right? So if you make good choices, you can push it back quite a bit, including exercise and diet and being mentally active, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
They only start showing up once you've been diagnosed, or
Mm.
be seen before.
We all have them. Yeah, like we all have them present. But what happens is people who have this have them in excess. They're not easy to see, right? You have to look at them under a very like high powered, like macro system level like test. But what you can see is when we do things like an MRI or an fMRI specifically, or like a PET scan, you can see that areas of the brain that should light up no longer do. Like they're dark because it's so impacted with these plaques and tangles. So that's more what we would see than the other, but everyone has them. It just, you have an excess of them and they're starting to interfere. I have a little video that kind of highlights the progression of this. And I'll play that for you really quick. It just kind of showing how it progresses. Sometimes we talk about it in like a period of time. So for a couple of years, you know, you might not see a whole lot. It's just kind of little things that might even be missed. But then it typically hits a point where, you know, it is diagnosed. There are treatments for this that we'll talk about, but it tends to only slow it down, not reverse it. Yeah. I mean, so it tends to play a role in, so, okay, so there are other neurocognitive disorders. So the one vascular neurocognitive disorder does have some correlation with like a traumatic brain injury. Not necessarily Alzheimer's, but this one, because it's very related to like blood flow and brain functioning, it can have a correlation with that. Oh, no, not necessarily, right? So I mean, I won't say it's not possible, but no, like, so like people who are like football players or boxers or, you know, people who have like a lot of head trauma, like what that can do is cause a lot of other issues like brain swelling and like delays and slowness and like brain damage, right? But not necessarily dementia. It can have a correlation with the vascular one, but that's the only one. These are other examples of the dementias. Alzheimer's most common. These are the other ones, yeah. You can slow it down if you catch it early, right? There tends to be a point of like no return where they stop medication because it won't help them. So in the first few years of the disorder, maybe first 4 to 5 years, medication will slow it, lifestyle changes will slow it. But after that, it kind of hits this point where those things don't do anything anymore. And then it becomes about comfort and like being somebody who's just as comfortable as you can. Yeah.
Is it always like affects the order of the brain, like in the video I was saying?
It kind of jumps around because the tangles and plaques are so haphazardly like located. It can be, I think the cruelest part about things like Alzheimer's and these is they can come and go at times. Like you have a moments of lucidity and then moments where it's completely gone. Like, so for 1 minute, you could be talking to someone, you know who they are, you remember everything. And then the next minute, who are you? Right. And that's just like the nature of this, because there are these pockets of these things. And so that tends to be kind of how it progresses. Like, so you don't always see it following the exact order, but that's a pretty common progression, even if it doesn't always fit neatly. Yeah.
So do the plaques
Tangles.
like
Yeah. Yeah, so they're blocking like the communication between two neurons, and that's what's causing a lot of these issues, right? And so one of the like ways that they're trying to target this is through ways of breaking up these plaques and tangles, because they become so large that they basically shut a neuron down. And so what you're seeing is this progressive loss of neuron communication that then correlates to all these changes. And so if you could break up these plaques and tangles, then we could reduce like that from happening. That's kind of the target of how we treat them.
So maybe it's similar to like radiation therapy, with specific cells, but it's
Yeah.
like neurons are so small.
They are, and that's where it's tricky, right? It's been so tricky to treat, but like I said, it's a huge focus of research because this affects 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. 1 in 10. That's kind of sobering, right? That's a lot of people.
So hypothetically, if somebody, when they were younger and then until like 65 have used a drug, like not a medication, like, I don't know, some kind of drug, like let's say smoked weed for a long time, or they did LSD, whatever, and this specific drug kind of blocked synapses, could that be a cause of a lack of neural activity when they're hitting 65 and suddenly they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's or one of these?
Yeah. I mean, it's not going to help the situation,
But it's not
but
a
that's
major
not
cause.
necessarily a major cause, but so it can lead to its own set of issues, right? When people abuse substances, it leads to all sorts of problems depending on the substance and how much they used it. But it doesn't necessarily make you more prone to
There's no
this.
correlation.
Nah, I mean, if there is, I'm sure there's a correlation for everything, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just probably pretty small. So, using substances excessively causes issues, but doesn't necessarily make you more prone to these, if that makes sense. It could, I mean, it could, but it's not typically causal, right? It just is a product of aging, sadly, but it might make you more vulnerable to a degree, right? It could be one of many factors that make you more vulnerable.
I feel that stimulants have a correlation.
Mhm.
hopefully, use also have a correlation with higher rates of dementia. I
Yeah,
don't know how high the correlation is.
Right. there's so many things that, like I was saying, blood pressure, blood sugar levels, like stimulants, like people who don't like take care of their brain, people use steroids when they were younger. There's like a million little like things, but as far as like understanding how they all come together, like we're still kind of in our infancy with that, sadly. With how many people this affects, you would think we knew more, but we're getting there, but it's slow, so slow. And I put this up here, Lewy body dementia is the number two most common. My dad had Lewy body dementia. He lived with it for 15 years before it took his life. Really, really like hard to watch, very similar to Alzheimer's, but it has more like hallucinations that come with it and loss of motor movement. So one very distinct element of this is people get like a shuffle at the end. It's a very common thing. They start to lose their ability to walk and they hallucinate more. Right, so you often see that people are having vivid hallucinations, and again, just like Alzheimer's, it comes and goes. Right, sometimes it was sweet. One sweet moment I remember with my dad, like he was talking to me and my mom, and for a moment he was just like he forgot who we were, right? Which happens a lot at the end, I hate to say. And he looked at my mom and he's like, "Did I ever get married?" Right, and like that's his wife, right, of like 30-40 years, and she's like, "Yeah," it's like, "You married me." And his eyes lit up and he was like, "Oh, hi." Right. And it was so cute. Like, after all these years and they're both in their 60s, like he looked at her like, "What are you doing?" Like I was just like so excited to see her. And I was like, "I'm gonna leave." Like, I don't want to be in this room right now. But like it was so cute, right? And like my dad always tried to find the humor in things. Like he'd be like, "I can read a book twice. I never remember what happened," right? Like he was always trying to like have a good sense of humor with it. But these are hard things to watch and hard things to experience. The third most common is vascular, like we were talking about earlier. People have a stroke or some kind of like cerebrovascular accident of some kind. Heart attacks, strokes, seizures can often lead to those. Pick's disease and Creutzfeldt-Jakob are kind of on the rare side. There was a case of Creutzfeldt-Jakob like 3 weeks ago. I read about it on like a Psych news page. It's a slow-acting virus that kind of picks away at the brain, same with Pick's disease. Relatively uncommon, but they are other examples. These two are pretty common, Huntington's and Parkinson's. Parkinson's, you get a lot of like tremors and rigidity and shaking, that akathisia. They call a lot of like very famous people like struggling with Parkinson's. Huntington's is extremely genetic, right? Like this one you can test for and know genetically, like whether or not you're prone to it. But all of these are other types of neurocognitive disorders.
Average.
A lot of people wait till they're like in their 50s. 40s or 50s, right, is pretty common, and the tests are relatively accurate. It's just up to you. That's a tough one to decide. Like, do you want to know or not? You know, like,
It's not. Well,
doesn't tend to. It tends to be, all of these tend to be like later. They can start earlier. So like Parkinson's and Huntington's can start in your 50s. That's not unheard of at all, right? People will see like small early signs of like shaking, and like tremors or personality changes. So these tend to start a little bit earlier than like Alzheimer's or Lewy body, which are much later to occur.
What is Huntington's disease?
So Huntington's disease, you get a lot of movement related issues and like memory as well. But with this one, like you have a lot of like, it's very progressive and genetic, right? So what you tend to see is that people lose their muscle coordination. Like that's kind of the big key, is it's movement and muscle coordination. So they start to lose control of their ability to make movements. It gets very jerky. It's got some similarities to like ALS, for example. So it tends to, or Lou Gehrig's disease as it's sometimes called. And again, like I said, it's very, very genetic, and it tends to be more like 50s, like late 40s, early 50s is when you start to see small little like signs of it, and then it just gets worse and worse over time. So it's much more muscle related, muscle control, but it does tend to have some like personality and memory changes, which is why it falls here. I think what I'll do, I'm gonna stop here. And then next time what we'll do is we'll go over, there's some treatments and interventions and then some tips, like lifestyle tips. And then we'll move on to forensic psych after that. Please, please, please don't forget about your paper. Don't forget about the title and references page and all of that kind of stuff. If you still need examples, remember there's like 5 sample papers on Canvas to look at. I will see you all on Wednesday. Bye.